Thank you. As introduced, my name is Bruce Harrell. I'm the first mayor of API descent in the history of the city of Seattle. I would like to thank the API Coalition and the Civic Leadership USA for this, what I consider a phenomenal opportunity. So I'm going to be very candid with you, very truthful, because quite candidly, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and I got to tell you, Ms. Mall, I was very inspired by your story. I don't typically tell my personal story in Seattle because I was born and raised there, and most people sort of know it. I spend more time talking about what is relevant to you. If building unity was easy, we would do more than just talk about it. So I spend more time talking about how do we accomplish that. I don't adore the question. I like spending time talking about solutions. But I'll give you some context because, quite frankly, some of you are probably Googling me on your phone. Trying to figure out, well, who is this guy? What is his story? So I'll share a little bit about myself. I'll try to weave it in. But I'm going to tell you the punchline. The talent in this room is amazing. Hardworking, educated, ethical people. You wake up early, you do the hard work. The talent here is phenomenal. And I am speaking to leaders, people who already have defined sort of who found their sense of self-purpose. So growing up, I never said I was going to be a leader. I just put in the work. I'll tell you a little bit about the story. I think where Fiona's story and mine differ is if you go to my office at the city of Seattle, and remember, we are the second most affluent city in this country. I am a strong mayor, meaning that I am in charge of a $3 billion budget that some cities have weak mayors. I have to actually be the executive of the city making fiscal decisions. And I also have to kiss babies and go in parades and give fancy speeches. But my story is a little different because if you come to my office, you'll see when I was 18 years old, and that wasn't just a few years ago. I was accepted to Harvard and Yale and Stanford, and I had thought about going to those schools. I graduated valedictorian of my class. I was the MVP in 3 sports. I guess you would call me an overachiever coming out of high school, and I spent some time at Harvard, but I committed to Stanford. But as this article states, it said, I'm going to go to the University of Washington. That's where I decided, against my parents' desire. Go Huskies. And in the first paragraph of the article, it said, because I'm going to be mayor of the city of Seattle someday. It's in my office, 1977. So my calling was a little different, that I looked at my own background. My mother was Japanese, and she was interned under the executive order 9066, which many of you know. My father and mother met when they were 14 years old. My father is African American. He came from Louisiana. They met and went to high school together, and they didn't know they were going to produce a kid that looked sort of like he was Hawaiian. But I was more privileged than most because they were ahead of their time, and they were married their entire life. They both have transitioned and passed away shortly around each other through natural causes. But they told me at a young age I could do anything. I could do anything that I wanted to, and they instilled in me a voracious appetite to read and to collaborate. And I'm going to weave that story into what I want to talk about, the opportunity that the API community has before us right now. We are being hated right now. Let's just get it out there. Hate crimes are up 2% overall. Just read an article that hate crimes against the API community is up 339%. We are being hated right now. And this isn't the first time in our history or in the history of the world where certain ethnic groups have been hated. You may recall in the 14th century, the European Jews were blamed for the bubonic plague. Many of you know right here in this area in San Francisco in the 1900s, the plague in Chinatown. You remember that story. The 1980s, the Haitians were blamed for HIV/AIDS. This is not new to this country. Many of you know the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was in effect for 61 years to 1943. But what was right before it? Executive Order 9066 in 1942. The Asians, this is nothing new to us, API community, nothing new at all. And like I said, my mother was 11 years old. There was a whole block where my Japanese parents, they owned flower shops. My mother's name was Rose because my grandfather, that was his favorite flower. All taken from them. So how was I, in a city that's one of the richest in the country, that is 66% white, our API community is approximately 14%. African Americans less than 8%. And in my race, and I'm going to tell you this just so I'm clear, in my particular race there are 15 people running. There was a person whose grandfather was a mayor and a governor, there was a city council president, there was a state legislative person, 15 people running. There was an NBA star for 20 years, there were community activists. In addition to that, organized labor put in about 1.5 million, and in addition to that, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Elizabeth Warren, Pramila Jayapal, the progressive flank of the Congress, all supported my opponent. In addition to that, we won by the largest margin in about 30 years. And as much as I like to think it was my dazzling good looks that got me elected, I'd like to think that. The first reason we won by such an aggressive margin, because quite frankly, as you heard from Fiona and other electeds in here, very simple strategy. We worked the hardest. We outworked everybody. Make it clear, I have 3 deputy mayors. They're all women. I have 12,000 employees. I have 3 revenue streams of $1 billion apiece. We have organized labor. We have a lot of the challenges in the city. But Seattle is an interesting city because many of you spend time there. We open it up to trade to China. We are first and foremost a port maritime city. From that we build aerospace, another way to transport goods. So from a port to a manufacturing to a maritime city, we built aerospace. And then in 1962 we had the World's Fair. And you know we put the Space Needle in there and said that all the world will be a city of creative thinking and innovation. And from that we built high tech and biotech. And we built a great university system. We educated nurses in healthcare. Right now, I've had the luxury of having a one-on-one meeting with Andy Jassy, who replaced Jeff Bezos. I've been in the home of Bill Gates to talk about health and human services. I have a pretty good hand up here in Seattle because we are rich with resources. We have a compassionate city, but we have income inequality. We have the richest 2 people in the world right there, but we have people living in tents and in cars. So what was my secret sauce? Well, first of all, with the defund movement, I said I'm not defunding anything. I just came out with it. And the reason I'm not defunding the police is I could read a balance sheet and I could read a profit and loss statement, and while I am intolerant of racism, in fact, I've led national class actions on racism. I actually, as an attorney, I didn't weave that in, I'm an attorney by profession before I was elected. And by the way, I was on the city council. I was the only person of color for a while on the city council. Let me clarify that. It was me and 8 white folks. Just be clear. And I was the 4th person in our city history to be council president twice. And what I said was, because I could read a balance sheet, you invest in an organization you want to optimize, and I want everyone, black, brown, yellow, red, whatever the rainbow is of people, I want them all safe. That is a unifying element, make no mistake about that. I've never met a community that said they want to be unsafe. I want 7-minute response times. But I said also, and it took some controversy, I said that if you see the George Floyd video and you see Officer Chavain kneeing on his neck, you will never be an officer in my department unless you will admit that that was inhumane murder. So let's get this straight. We don't tolerate racism, but we want to fight for safety. So that was my first narrative. The other piece that I talked about was education. When I look at people that are falling through the cracks, everyone is not as gifted as Fiona. Everyone's not as gifted with numbers. Some people are good with their hands. Some people are sculptors. Some people are artists. Some people could develop code. Some people could do research. So I've even gift-based learning. So I talked about our educational strategies will be our biggest equity movement in the city. That's a unifying element. And I say this to aspiring politicians, every opportunity you have to unify a crowd, to unify a city, to unify a state, to unify a country, you take full advantage of that, and we all want to feel safe. I use words like hope, faith, love, and kindness because people on the bookends of politics, they're consumed with hate. Hate is not a sustainable kind of energy. So in our campaign, we talked about hope, faith, and love. And so what wasn't also mentioned in my background, so I played football for the University of Washington. I actually led the Rose Bowl in tackles in 1978. I played in the Sun Bowl as a linebacker. I'm one of the top 10 leading linebackers in the University of Washington history. So when you're a middle linebacker, you don't run away from contact. You have to run into it. And so growing up, there were not a lot of Asian athletes. My parents had the foresight, it was luck to be honest with you, to name me Bruce, because Bruce Lee, that was my guy. Bruce Lee, I must have more Bruce Lee posters in my room than any child possibly, and I played linebacker like this because that's how he used to fight. I didn't have a lot of role models. And so when I use words like hope, faith, love, and kindness, I also talk about discipline, that you have to have a level of discipline. My wife, I've been married for over 30 years, and my oldest son received his master's from the University of Washington. Our daughter finished her master's at Boise State, and our middle son is getting his MBA from Wharton Business School. He graduates in a couple of weeks. And I talked to them about discipline. So in my political message, that's the word that I use. You have to have discipline. Now, my API brothers and sisters, this is going to get a little sensitive what I'm going to close with here. I'm just going to give you a few more minutes. I just finished the book Pachinko. Many of you read that about a Korean family that immigrated to Japan by Min Jin Lee. I understand they're turning into a movie or series now or something like that. That talks about the soft underbelly of our API community. The soft underbelly. What is that soft underbelly? Is they lump us all together. But we know we've had our own differences. So when we talk about this word uniting that we believe in, we have to first own our own ethnic challenges, and it's okay to talk about. I am biracial. I don't look at anyone, I don't think there's anyone in this room that's half black and half Japanese. If you are, will you raise your hands? I found the promised land with that person. So when I look at you, I just want to know what we have in common. I will find that commonality. When I grew up, and I don't know, and I've got a few gray hairs in my hair, and see the younger folks, when I grew up, the whole racialized discussion was black and white, black and white, black and white. You know, they wanted us to be the model minority, right? And in these racialized discussions in this country, I wasn't sure where I fit in. First of all, I was mixed, but more importantly, I didn't know what our story's about because I was living with a mother who always said, speak your English well, be American, stay under the radar, play by the rules. And while I was passionate for justice, I didn't know where I fit into that narrative. My first cousin, who was Japanese, married a fine cousin who's Chinese. And so their two kids are half Chinese and half Japanese, which is really I get a kick out of that because I talk to them about their experience. I think I'm their favorite uncle, I think. Because I talk to them about the challenges they have. Because I think we will not get to this uniting part until we really start to recognize what we have in common. First of all, no one in here wants to get COVID, right? I mean, we had a president calling it the Chinese flu, right? Creating fear in this country against our community. So we know we want our kids to be educated better than we are. We know we want safety. What are these unifying elements? So when you have your breakout sessions, when you have your strategy sessions, when we unite the API community, I think we can play an integral role in this country, because this country's struggling with equity versus equality. Now, what do I mean by that? And this is my close, by the way. This is my mic drop. They're struggling with equity versus equality. So what do I mean by that? And I support equity. I mean, equality is easy. Treat everybody the same. That's equality. When I was on the city council, I noticed that the street lights were out in the poorer areas. And but in the more affluent areas, they seem to be less street lights out. So I did a study and I said, well, what is the policy? And they said, well, the policy is this. When people complain, we replace them. That's fair. It's equal to everybody. But then why are the poorer areas, why do they have more out? Well, we found out because they don't complain as much. Or they assume someone else is going to complain, and a lot of them are doing other things, working multiple jobs, but affluent people, they complain like that. So it was an equal policy that had a disparate impact on communities. And so we were smarter than them. We said, first of all, let's change our strategy from high pressure sodium, the yellowish lights, to LED lights. First of all, that's environmental friendly. And then we started changing them in quadrants. Because if you think about it, simple math, you know the lifespan of a light. And it was more expensive for our crews to go from all over the city when people were complaining. The less expensive route was to do it in quadrants based on the life expectancy of the bulb. So we were efficient, but we also addressed the issue of equity. And right now, with the decisions at Harvard, dealing with the Harvard case and the University of North Carolina case on equity versus equality and the race-conscious admissions discussions that are going on, I'm going to suggest to you, and I may not be invited back next year, but that's okay. I'll still come even if I'm not invited. That we have to be a champion for justice, for equity, because we have to recognize that our indigenous brothers and sisters were here first. We have to recognize that African Americans were brought over here in slave ships, and that there's institutional and historical racism, and that they are not at an equal footing with many Americans. We have to recognize that this community here still suffers from discrimination as real as the sun is in the sky. It is real stuff. And we have to recognize that justice should be what unites us in a country that will turn minorities against one another. That's my message. That is very seductive for those in power to turn people against one another. That is the gift we have in this API community, because unlike other communities, we got Chinese, Japanese, Laotians, Vietnamese, Filipinos, East Indians. We are diverse within ourselves, and if we could lead these discussions in equity and justice, that is our uniting secret sauce. And I hosted a conference, I hosted a big concert for Ukraine. And I did that for the obvious reason, what's going on there. The threat to democracy there is a threat to democracy everywhere. But some of my East African brothers and sisters said, well, you know, in Tigray and Ethiopia and Eritrea, there's a lot of, in East Africa, there's a lot of turmoil and threats to democracy there too. Why are you giving so much attention to Ukraine? And so we did the concerts we gave. We raised a lot of money. We gave about 70% to Ukraine and 30% to other organizations. Because I said that I will be a mayor of such an important city to lead the conversation on equity. And that's, I think, the opportunity in front of us. In this country where there's so much anti-Asian hate going on. I gave you the statistic, 336% increase in the last year. Therein lies our opportunity to unite amongst ourselves to lead and help and assist and facilitate the country's discussions on equity. And that's why I'm here. Thank you very much.